So I want to next take a little bit of time and go through some of the ways that modern games and leading games, open world games right now, are building volition and deeply satisfying autonomy, because even though the ingredients may be the same, autonomy, competence, relatedness, the formulas can change. There's a lot of opportunity to be, very creative in how these things get satisfied. So the first is, what we call the amusement park structure. And this is really invented and forever dominated by the game that essentially created the open world genre, you could argue, which is Grand Theft Auto. And the amusement park structure is, operates on a pretty simple premise, which is build a dense world of satisfying rides, right? So when you are engaged in the narratives in Grand Theft Auto, it's not really your narrative. You're switching characters, you're engaging in different stories, but you're getting exposed to this world and these opportunities of things that have meaningful value, in that when you engage in them, you're conquering challenges, these are good rides, right? And because there's enough of a spectrum of these good rides, it's actually very need satisfying, and you feel a sense of meaningful choice. So this is all building volition. So GTA doesn't win because it's really big and there's lots of things to do. And I mean, whenever any open world game starts to come out, one of the metrics that people start talking about is how big it is. Well, we discovered you can take the last version of our game and fit it into a map that's 10 times as big. And everybody gets very excited about that. And the reason people get excited about that is one of the ways that players assume that they're going to have all kinds of autonomy is it's big, because they give you the benefit of the doubt that no matter how big it is, it's going to be awesome. So that's kind of, I guess, a good thing, but it also creates a very high bar to clear. So you get a lot of freedom, but you also have all of these really enjoyable and meaningful activities in GTA. But what GTA lacks are rich opportunities for growth. It doesn't have RPG mechanics, or again, I'm talking about early GTA. I know we have multiplayer and all these other things now. I'm just trying to lay out a little bit of the fundamental DNA of the game. And what it lacks really are rich opportunities for growth and also for creating a player story. Because the whole idea of a player narrative, the player narrative is really critical, because that's how players integrate and amplify volition, right? We're engaged in a personal narrative all the time. And when we go into games, that narrative just continues. So these narratives will ideally reflect the player's self, interests, and values. And games can build volition by giving players the appropriate tools in order to build those narratives. And so what we see in GTA is we don't see a lot of rich building blocks for that, but amusement park structures are relatively thin, but they do give kind of words and verbs. I'm in a bowl, I'm a triathlete, I'm going to be in a drag race. And so the player then has to assemble, essentially a narrative about, well, I'm like the most awesome drag racer, in GTA, or, they're assembling a narrative, but, it's relatively thin. And so when we then start to look at some other examples of how needs get satisfied in open worlds, we start to see how people turn the knobs on some of these things in order to increase volitional engagement. So the next thing I want to turn to is an approach called the dense RPG approach. And a good representative for this is Skyrim. People have played the hell out of Skyrim for a lot of hours over a very long period of time. It has a very high level of sustained engagement and volitional engagement. And Skyrim really wins because they have incredibly rich RPG systems that deepen volition by empowering growth and providing richer narrative threads. They're giving much longer narrative threads than you would in an amusement park structure, right? So there's just, it's a staggering amount of things that you can do when you're in the game. And this results in more elements of need satisfaction in order to build volition. You've got more meaningful choice, but you also now have the ability to build agentic narratives, because you've got all these narrative threads that you can begin to stitch together to build your narrative. These are not things that are really present in the amusement park structure. That builds volition. The other thing is that you're not just looking at issues of overcoming challenges and feeling that moment-to-moment satisfaction of competence. You're also engaging in growth through the RPG mechanics. And that is one of the most powerful ways to build volition if you create that meaningful sense of growth in games. So Skyrim, again, using the same ingredients, but they're essentially putting them in different degrees and creating different systems in order to build volitional engagement. The main volitional hook, of course, is this growth, and it's integrated with a massive quest system. But I would say that one of the things that's great about it is that when you engage in quests and you do things, it has an impact on you. So your personal narrative, to be a vampire, you can actually change who you are and become a vampire. So there's this impact of systems as you make your choices that truly make the character that you're building your own, which is really powerful volitionally. You've got in Skyrim something you don't have in GTA, which is you get full sentences. I'm the head of the Witchers College. I'm the leader of the Thieves Guild. I suck blood of sleeping villagers. I now have these larger chunks with which to build my player narrative. And so all of these things have meaningful impact on the actual character themselves. But there's one thing that is missing from this, which is that in the end, nothing really matters, no matter what you decide to do. You could be a werewolf, vampire, cat, person who, I don't know, to fill in sentences here. Whatever you decide to do, you don't have this major, this main storyline that you're shifting or adapting. There's no epic impact on the world. Really, the impact is just building a narrative yourself. So it's a very powerful game. But I want to turn now to another formula that's out there in order to build autonomy and build volitional engagement. And that's the idea of narrative impact. So the representative game we're going to pull here is Mass Effect. So Mass Effect, the main volitional hook, the main thing that makes me feel agentic and engaged in what I'm doing and need satisfied in what I'm doing is not just I can change the world, I can change the universe. And so they're spreading out across multiple needs, various satisfactions. So you're getting meaningful choice. You probably can't notice it. It's slightly less meaningful choice, but instead of making meaningful choices amongst little tributaries and rivers of things that are going on, that as you would in Skyrim, you're making choices between these sort of deep, these deep rivers that go and they're all like coming towards the ocean, and you have a sense of epic scale. And this is rendered in the content and in the cinematics and in all of these things, right? So you feel this deep sense of narrative purpose. And because you're directing these great narratives, you also have relatedness, right? Everybody that I know has a Mass Effect story about like, oh, they felt this moment of connection. Mine really was involving Tali, and I accidentally killed her, and then I had to go back and reload my save game, and it was very traumatic because I didn't know if I saved in time, but it's okay, she's okay. And then there's also some growth and some overcoming of challenge in the game, but that's not really the tentpole of the Mass Effect experience. So Mass Effect, if Grand Theft Auto gives words, and if Skyrim gives sentences, Mass Effect is giving whole paragraphs for players to kind of assemble and put together, right? And so you're able to put together, a richer story more quickly that can build a stronger volitional engagement with the game. And so it's all powerful stuff when it works, right? When it works and you're telling the story you want to be telling, and then you get to see it jump to life on the screen, it's very powerful. The problem for you guys as developers is if you take this kind of approach, you have, what we call kind of a mind-reading dilemma, which is that you've got to figure out not just like this paragraph and paragraph 2 and paragraph 7, but paragraph 48. And you've got to figure all that stuff out, and that's really hard to do because players are going to have different opinions, and you can't fully realize every possible outcome. And so your risk of breaking volition is really high, right? A player could be putting together this really great narrative, and then try to get to a point that they want to get to, and if you don't offer it, it's not just that they have a bad moment, it's that it really blows apart the whole narrative for them. Now, it's the same thing that's going on when we look at what happened when Mass Effect had the big ending debacle, right? Because if Mass Effect is sort of standing on giving people meaningful choice to create their epic story about how they save the universe, having everything end the same way is not just like, oh, I'm really mad at you for doing that. It's you, betrayer, hundreds of, I mean, this is deep because we're talking about basic psychological needs. So what you have happening is by the end of the game, the betrayal happens because they essentially kick out meaningful choice because the ending is the same. And then with meaningful choice without that foundation, then there is no, narrative purpose. That falls away. And then if nothing I did really matters, then I didn't really save Tally. She doesn't love me. I've come to accept it. That falls away. And then with all that gone, you no longer have any structure supporting volition. And worse yet, you've essentially violated this contract with the player because you've messed with their basic psychological need for autonomy. And this is the thing about autonomy. Autonomy is powerful stuff. It's like the fentanyl of, I don't know if that's the best example, but it's stuff that it's super powerful, but it can, you've got to handle it really carefully. So bottom line is you don't want to mess with autonomy. All right, let's talk about one more, and then I want to turn a little bit and talk about, based on everything that we've said about some of these dynamics and systems, what could come next. So the last one I want to talk about is Witcher, which we kind of see as a hybrid. It's sort of cool when Witcher came out and we had the chance to play that game and look at that game. Because Witcher really takes inspiration from Mass Effect and Skyrim structures. So you see a rich main narrative that's like Mass Effect. It's fully realized, and there's beautiful, deep story there. But you also see an incredibly deep system of quests and stories and activities that can be undertaken in the way that Skyrim provides them. And in some ways, that provides nice coverage, and that provides nice, dense coverage for need satisfaction, whether you're engaged in the big epic story or you just want to have a meaningful couple hours of play to help yourself progress. Lots of deep volition building, again, meaningful choice over narrative. You've got a lot of those same kind of relational dynamics. And you've got a little bit of growth. Growth is not kind of the, there are RPG systems in there, not as dense or as rich as Skyrim's. But you are conquering challenges, and you're really kind of hitting on all these cylinders, so there's very strong volitional engagement. One thing that Witcher did it was very interesting to me was they traded in fidelity in order to better deliver on the promise of impactful choices. And so they couldn't fully render all the endings they want to render, so they're like, well, let's not render them, let's just tell them comic book style. And let's make the bet that the player just wants to see the story. They want to finish the story, and they want to see the story that they were writing. And I think that was the right choice. Would it be great if they could have fully rendered everything? Sure, that would have been great. But the choice here to focus on a dynamic that is going towards need satisfaction versus just going towards fidelity, I think is always the right decision. Also, even in their side quests were not just take these 10 flowers to Bob in the town over. Their side quests were pretty fully realized 3-act structures. Geralt gets a mystery handed to him that he must solve. Then he goes and figures it, it's put in front of him and he has to make a decision, and then he sees an impact. And so there's this sort of full narrative that lets people, again, have their paragraphs handed to them about what they're doing. But if they misstep, these things are decoupled from the main narrative, so it doesn't break their volitional engagement in the game itself. So having kind of these nested, deep stories, deep side stories within the larger main narrative worked well. So one of the reasons that I talk about multiple games and multiple strategies is to point out that there is no one right way to do this. We can certainly look at it, and as researchers we look at, well, this seems to have a lot of value, and this has some value, and this is more value. But there's lots of different ways that you can tackle these issues, all of which are focused on need satisfaction in the service of building volition and people leaning forward into the experience. But there are lots of ways to satisfy those needs, right?